I'll turn it down. Welcome to the Wayland Library. Thank you for coming out this afternoon. I'm Courtney from the library. I just wanted to do some housekeeping. We are recording for Waycam and our YouTube page, so you'll be able to watch and share this later. For the folks that are on Zoom, you can put your questions in the chat at any time, and I will raise my hand and read them aloud when we get to the Q&A sections. And now I'm going to introduce Angela Crocker from the Parmenter Foundation.
Thank you so much. So this is the second of 3 series of the Finishing Touches, Planning for Last Chapters of Life. That, of course, was created by our librarian person who came up with that handy name. It's a series of panels that the Wayland Council on Aging and the Wayland Free Public Library and the Parmenter Foundation have curated for our community. 2 weeks ago, we enjoyed learning from attorney Denise Yurkovsky about estate planning, and today we'll be learning about how to plan for medical decisions. On June 5th, I hope you'll join us again here at the same time for a Demystifying Hospice panel. We'll learn all about the hospice, how it works, and who the teammates of hospice are. But today, our medical decisions panel will answer questions about what plans you can or should have in place for the future for when you are able or unable to advocate for your own health wishes, and what medical information the EMS and fire department needs, and where they'll look if you are unable to provide the information for yourself. As a nurse attorney with over 30 years of legal experience, we have Kathleen Summers here from Generations Law Group, and she concentrates her legal practice on estate planning, Medicaid, and long-term care planning and guardianship. She is a top expert who guides her clients and their families as they navigate the legal and healthcare worlds, especially when crises occur. We also are lucky to have today with us Chief Neil McPherson, who came to Wayland in 2016 as the Assistant Fire Chief with over 25 years of firefighting experience. He's been here since 2016 and became Chief for the Wayland Fire Department in 2019. We're so thankful to have both of you here today. I'll welcome you up, Attorney Summers.
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the Wayland Library and the Wayland Council on Aging and the Parmenter Foundation for inviting me to be here today. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart. As both a registered nurse and an attorney, although I joke a little bit that I haven't laid hands on anyone probably in about 24 years, so don't count on those skills. But they really do help to direct a lot of what I do as an attorney, as a counselor, and helping individuals and their families really kind of traverse the healthcare world when a loved one has a crisis, trying to really understand what your options can be. And one of the most critical pieces of all of that is making sure that you have in place everything that you need from a legal standpoint for medical decision making. So ideally, it's dealing with these issues while you're competent and capable and healthy and not in the middle of some type of crisis situation. So everyone has a packet, and I know that we're also recording this as well. We can provide for the individuals who are on Zoom copies of these documents. But in your packet, I just wanted to point out to everybody a little bit about the presentation outline, and I'm going to go through for you all some of the very important medical documents, actually legal documents that need to be in place regarding medical decision making. There's also in there just kind of a handy thing to think about in terms of things that you should bring to the hospital with you if you're able to pre-plan, or sometimes people recommend even having kind of a to-go bag, so that you have some important things. In this day and age, we all want to make sure we have our charger for our phone and other items to make sure that if you are hospitalized, that you have important information with you and important items to you. But let me start by talking about healthcare decision making and how that works here in Massachusetts. So it is presumed, if you're competent and capable of being able to express your own healthcare decisions, that you get to make healthcare decisions for yourself. But we have a specific law to Massachusetts called the Healthcare Proxy Law. It's actually very different than many other states. Other states oftentimes have written documents that you check off in terms of things that you do or do not want to have done with respect to healthcare. But in Massachusetts, we made the decision that instead of having a document per se that talks about what you do or don't want to have done, we have a healthcare proxy. And this is where you appoint someone of your choosing to be able to step into your shoes to make healthcare decisions for you in the event you become incompetent or incapacitated. So it's what we like to call springing by law, meaning that that document is not actually activated until it is activated by a healthcare provider, until they have documented and said you are no longer capable of making your own healthcare decisions. And what we find in that document is that it is one that provides a large amount of authority. Now, you can pull these documents off the website. You can go online. You can pull off a Massachusetts healthcare proxy. It's usually a 2-page document in which you name the person of your choosing who could step into your shoes to make healthcare decisions in the event you can't make them for yourself. You also want to think about naming a secondary to that as well, in case your primary decision maker is either unavailable for some reason or no longer willing to be able to act as your proxy. But again, they're stepping into your shoes. They're making decisions as if they're standing in your shoes. That's the intent of the document. And because the document doesn't really talk about specifics, because it doesn't say, I want to be resuscitated, I don't want to be resuscitated, I want to be on a feeding tube, I don't, etc. You need to make sure you have a conversation with the person that you've asked to be your proxy. Otherwise, they're not going to have a framework for making decisions on your behalf. And I can't tell you how often we have family members after a crisis has occurred and a loved one has been through end of life and decisions had to be made for this person, that the family members say, I'm not sure I did the right thing. By talking with your loved one or whoever you have asked to be in this important position for you, you are giving them the framework to make the decisions. You're helping to guide them so that when they have to make these decisions on your behalf, or if they have to make these decisions, they're prepared. They at least have some idea of what is important to you, of how you want decisions made. Now, we can't cover everything, but it's super, super important to have that conversation to make sure, number one, they're willing to be in that position, because it's a difficult position oftentimes to ask someone to step into your shoes, to handle what might very well be end-of-life decisions for you. And again, that they have guidance about what is important to you and what is not with respect to those kinds of decisions. So that's the healthcare proxy. It allows you to name someone to step into your shoes to manage healthcare decision-making in the event that you're unable to make those decisions for yourself because you're incompetent or incapacitated for some reason. Now, we have other documents as well that we use here. Another one is called a living will. Now, this is a statement document. This tends to say things like, I want to be taken care of, I want my healthcare needs met. And typically, it also talks about not wanting resuscitation, not wanting to be maintained in an artificial way. Now, a living will in Massachusetts is not legally binding. It is just direction to your proxy. It's guidance for them. And ultimately, it is the proxy that would make the decisions if they have to step forward in your shoes. But the living will can be helpful. It can help to provide some guidance. It can help to provide them with some support in making these types of decisions, particularly at end of life. Another document that we use is called a HIPAA authorization and release form. This is a document in which you name people who you want to be part of the conversation. So let's say you might have 3 children and you choose one of them. And by the way, I always recommend you choose one at a time. And I'll talk a little bit about how you choose a proxy, but usually recommend that you name one at a time, because nothing is worse than having multi-decision makers at that time trying to kind of vie for who's going to end up having the wishes described and followed. But this allows multiple people to be part of the conversation. So maybe you've chosen one child to be your primary healthcare decision maker, but you allow all three in this example to be part of the conversation with the healthcare providers to get information, to be able to discuss what's happening. But ultimately, one becomes the decision maker under the proxy. So basic legal documents that we recommend that you have in place are that healthcare proxy, the living will, and the HIPAA authorization and release form. Now, there's a couple of other documents that I want to talk about as well. And oftentimes people will ask me about the MOLST form, MOLST, which soon will be called the POLST form, POLST. Very much the same thing, but what it stands for right now is Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. This is a document that you do with your healthcare provider. And this is a document that talks about specifics with respect to what your wishes are. I do want to be resuscitated. I don't want to be hospitalized. I do want to have IV fluids. Many different questions that you can discuss with your healthcare provider. And the reason it's called a medical order for life-sustaining treatment, and I'm going to let the chief probably talk a little bit, I don't know if he's going to touch on this at all, but one of the reasons why we have this is, as you all know, our healthcare system is very disjointed. And you go from your home into the hospital, orders are filed in the hospital, then you go maybe to a rehab, new orders are filed in the rehab, then you go home and there's a whole new set of orders when you go home. And one of the intents of this MOLST is that it will follow you. I think about it like a prescription. It's done with your consult and your healthcare provider's consult, signed by your physician like a prescription, that then can be followed by all of the healthcare providers, including emergency providers, who now have a prescription, an order. Because typically you're at home, let's say, and you have been dealing with an illness. Maybe you're at end of life. Your family's with you. Everyone has agreed that the desire is to have you stay at home and to die at home. But it begins to happen. And what's the first thing everybody does? They call 911 and say, oh my gosh, we have an emergency. Well, 911 has certain requirements. I mean, they come into a situation, they have to deal with that situation, including potentially needing to transport someone to a hospital. What the MOLST does is it allows them to have an order that they can follow. And if the order says, do not transport, they don't transport. So a MOLST is something that you don't do with your legal advisor. It's something you do with your healthcare provider. The other thing I find about MOLST forms is that they're very dependent. Now, let's say you are an otherwise 50-year-old person in good health. Most likely your physician's not going to put a MOLST form in place with you that says, do not resuscitate. Of course, they're going to resuscitate unless there's a reason. So where we find MOLST forms usually used is with people who are dealing with long-term issues, people who are dealing with an acute issue, like an immediate onset of something that, again, both of these are believed that they will eventually lead to end of life, or someone of a certain age. And I say that a little tongue-in-cheek because it's very subjective. When is it that someone is old enough that a decision not to resuscitate should be honored? And so these are conversations that you have with your physician about what is appropriate for me and should we consider a MOLST form. And again, they can be very extreme in terms of your wishes, things like do not rehospitalize, do not resuscitate, all of that. Or they can be very clear about, yes, I do want these things done. And so that's something you really want to have a conversation with your healthcare provider about. Is it appropriate for me? And if so, what are my wishes and how do we get these documented so that they are honored regardless of the setting that you might be receiving services in? Home, hospital, rehab, nursing home, that type of thing. Now I want to go back to the question of how do you choose a healthcare proxy? So, you know, again, we're asked all the time, can I have both of my children be my proxy? Does it need to be the one who lives here? Does it need to be my oldest? Does it need, I don't have someone in my life. I don't maybe have children, maybe my spouse, I don't have a spouse, or my spouse has already passed. How do I choose who a proxy could be? So first of all, again, typically only want you to have one at a time. We don't want to be setting people up for some kind of an argument or some kind of conflict at such an emotional time. You want to choose someone who you can have confidence in would do what you want to have done in that situation, not what they want to have done in that situation. And that's where having the conversation with the person that you've asked to be your proxy is so critical. You need to make sure that they're doing what you want and that they understand what you want. So absolutely think about one person at a time, certainly can have backups. Now, the living out of the area, ideally, you know, we certainly can choose someone. In this day and age, getting someone by a cell phone, communicating in other ways is so much broader than it used to be. But healthcare decisions are often emergency type decisions, and having someone who's more local, if possible, is more ideal. Because they're going to, you know, have to, really communicate with healthcare providers, potentially being able to get in to see you, advocate for you, all of those kinds of things. Because remember, they're stepping into your shoes when you're not able to make these decisions for yourself or communicate your decisions for yourself. So it's absolutely critical that this person have that framework and that they're willing to do what you want them to do in that particular situation. And again, if they can be local, it's certainly helpful. But it can be, if you don't have somebody who's here, we certainly can utilize somebody who is at a distance as long as they're reachable and are willing to be able to step in and help out with different things. One of the things I also wanted to talk about was what happens if we don't have these things in place? So a critical healthcare situation occurs. You're not able to speak for yourself. You've never done a healthcare proxy. You don't have one in place. What happens then? Well, oftentimes this is when a court will get involved. And typically we need to go to a court and we need to petition the court to have what's called a guardian appointed. This is where someone who may not be someone you know, who may not be the person of your choosing, is appointed by the court to now step in and handle medical decisions for you. For instance, I'm often appointed by the courts to be someone's guardian. And I will be brought into a situation. Now, remember, this person is not capable of making their own decisions. They've been adjudicated as being incompetent or incapacitated. So oftentimes I'm not able to have a meaningful conversation with them about what's important to them. And if someone like myself is being appointed, it's usually because there isn't close family members who are able to step forward and willing to be in this position. So oftentimes I'm making healthcare decisions for this person in a vacuum. I don't know this person. I don't have a history with this person. I don't have the framework for what types of decisions they would want made. And I'm oftentimes having to make really, you know, like best interest type of decisions as opposed to what we call substituted judgment decisions, which is where I'm stepping into the person's shoes and acting as if they would. But I don't have that framework, so I can't. So if you don't have healthcare decision-making documents in place and a crisis occurs, we end up having to get a court involved. And now we're going through a process in which you really have lost all control over your healthcare. You're not able to have the person of your choosing be in that position to make decisions. So I think that's it from my perspective. Neil?
Right.
Yeah. Very good. Hello.
So I think we're gonna have questions at the end as well.
Yes.
So I'd like to thank you for allowing me to come today and speak about this topic. And I realize how difficult it is, right? Nobody wants to have the conversation as we get older and we get towards the end of life's. And I just want to tell you a little story. So I was a chief of another department for 10 years, and I was in my office and a car pulled up. And someone ran up the door and said, my mother, she's not breathing. So the ambulance crew was there and I was crew, we ran downstairs. When we got to the car, her mother was in fact not breathing. And her sister was in the car too. So I had one sister who was telling me, you need to resuscitate my mother. The other sister told us that we resuscitated her mother, that we were going to be sued. So when we talk about this, clearly, one of the things that I recommend is, number one, you do need to have a conversation with your loved ones. So you don't have a situation like that occurs. And number two, you need to communicate. If you have a MOLST or you have healthcare proxies, you need to make sure you're communicating that to other people so they understand what your wishes are. Because unfortunately, we see it far too often where maybe things are in place and we get there and we're looking for a MOLST form that gives us medical direction. And somebody says, well, I think we have one of these. And they'll go, well, I don't know, I don't think we have one. So we are forced to go ahead, if we don't have an active MOLST, a signed MOLST, a valid MOLST in front of us, to resuscitate somebody. Maybe someone really didn't want to be resuscitated. So it's really, really important. If you have a MOLST form, make sure you have it with you. Because if you don't have it with you, right now, we don't have a system today. We have to have the paper copy. And if we don't have that, we are going to be forced by our protocols. And all of our actions are regulated by the Department of Public Health in Massachusetts and OEMS. So we'll be forced to resuscitate people, even if they didn't want to, because we're missing that piece of paper. So it's super, super important. So some of the things that I was asked to speak about just become even utilizing fire and EMS for emergency medicals, right? I just want to talk a little bit about, if you call 911, does anybody know where that phone call goes in the town of Wayland? Who's on the other end of that phone? So if you don't know, at the public safety building, we have two dispatchers. We have one for police and one for fire. So that's where the calls go. So even if you're on your cell phone, that we can actually see on a screen, it will show us where you're calling from. If you call from your house phone, it will show us your address. If you call from a cell phone, we get a blip and it shows us a map. And it shows on that map a dot where you are located. If you have a super, super old cell phone, it may not work, but most of the current cell phones will show us that. So that's very valuable for us. But you're getting hold of people in Wayland if you are in Wayland. If you're on the Mass Turnpike, you're probably getting a hold of the state police or someone else, all right, for that. So when you call, when should you call 911? So we frequently deal with individuals who feel badly about calling us at night. So we get there in the morning and we say, well, how long has your chest pain been going on for? And they say, well, since 10:30 last night, but I didn't want to call you. So if I can please pass along to you and anybody else, do not hesitate to call us. We are there 24 hours a day for the shift. We're available at all times of night. What happens if you don't call us and you're having a situation or a medical episode? You can make it worse, especially with cardiac events. So please do not hesitate to call us, whether it's 12:30, 1:30 at night, 2:30 at night, it does not matter. Call us if you think you need us. Do not be afraid. So what type of situation should you call us for? Obviously, if your smoke detectors go off, if your fire alarm goes off, if you're having a medical emergency. And I get in this great debate with a lot of people about when to call for a medical emergency. So if somebody passes out, I'll use a story. I also work on a call department in Sherburne where I live. And there was a medical call down the street and it was somebody's 60th birthday party. And he passed out for about 15 seconds. And everybody was there for the birthday party. Looked like a great party, I wasn't invited. All right. But having said that, when I got down the street, we were talking and he absolutely did not want to go. And very simply, I finally convinced him to go. And he went to the hospital. He had like a 98% occlusion, right, which caused him to pass out. So if somebody is off of their baseline, their normal medical, status, and or something unusual happens, there's a reason for that. So my advice is to call 911. And sometimes people may not like when you call 911 and we show up because they're embarrassed and they shouldn't be. Right? One of the other misconceptions becomes you call the fire department. I'm going to get a big bill. What am I going to do about it? So just because we show up, we don't bill you. If we transport you, we will bill your insurance company. Right? Typically, if there's additional payments beyond what your insurance company pays, that gets written off. And if you really can't afford to pay it, then we have a hardship form. And we'll write off whatever the bill would be. We're not in the business of making money. We, of course, like for the residents of Wayland to supplement budgets and bring money back to the town where possible, but we're not out here to generate money. So you should never hesitate to call us. And if you do call us and you don't get transported, we're probably gonna make you sign a waiver, which just says you don't want to be treated or transported, and that's okay too. You have the right to do that. Just because we show up doesn't mean we're gonna take you. As Kathleen said, that probably would be kidnapping, and that would be a bad thing, and we'd get in trouble for that, right? That's bad. I also want to point out for well-being checks. So we do a fair amount of well-being checks, and that means that somebody has tried to call their neighbor and they can't get a hold of a neighbor or a loved one. Well, guess what? You can call us and we're happy to go to the residence with the police to check on that person to make sure they're okay. And I'd say 50% of the time we find people who actually are in need of some type of help, and maybe they weren't able to get to the phone. So please, I encourage you, when it comes to a lift assist, sometimes someone falls in a house and their loved one can't lift that person up. We can help you in those situations too. Be mindful that if somebody falls and you're of advanced age, then unfortunately bad things can happen in terms of broken bones. So it may seem like a whole lot of nothing, but it could be a significant or serious medical event, broken hip, etc. So when you call 911, what information do you have to give them? We talked about dispatchers on Wayland. What are the things that you should be telling them?
Location, address, who you are,
Okay,
and why you're calling.
exactly. So when we say why you're calling, I mean, what's the difference? You're calling from a house on 3 Main Street. Well, I'll tell you what the difference is. We had a call today, and it was reported at a construction site that somebody got hurt on the 3rd floor of that structure. So you know what we sent? We sent the ladder truck, in addition to the ambulance and the engine, because we thought we're gonna have to remove that person from the 3rd floor. So the more information about the nature of the call, if someone has fallen off the roof and is unresponsive, we may call for a helicopter. And we did today, we called to check if they were available. If they're on the 3rd floor, they're on a construction site, or there's something unusual, please let us know. Past medical history makes a difference. Did they sprain their ankle or are they not breathing? Because if they sprain their ankle, that's a little bit of a different response than, guess what? I just found someone and they're not breathing and they have no pulse, right? We're still gonna respond, but it might be a slightly different response. So many people say, why do you send all the fire trucks? Whenever I have medical, there's a bunch of fire trucks and police cars, and it's very embarrassing because all my neighbors ask about it, right? So does anyone know why we send the fire truck and we send police cars in addition to the ambulance? Number one, it comes to response time. So we have a station down south where there's an engine. And we have a station up north, right around the corner, where we have the ambulance and another engine. So if there's a call down south, the engine down south is gonna get there typically within 3 to 4 minutes. So we have better response time. The police cruisers may be even closer than we are because they're typically driving around the town. And the other piece is if we have to carry someone out of the 2nd or 3rd floor, or it's a difficult place to get them out, we use the additional staff to help us safely carry you out of a house and get you to the ambulance for transport. So one of the other questions I get all the time is, okay, so now we're gonna go ahead. Where are you gonna take me? So going back to this concept of being licensed by the Department of Public Health, we get a lot of people saying, you know something, I wanna go to this hospital or this hospital. And unfortunately, sometimes there are certain situations where we are not allowed to take you to the hospital of your choice. So very simply, if you have a cardiac event in Wayland and you're on the south side of town, we can't take you to Newton Wellesley. We have to take you to the closest appropriate facility, right? They have a cath lab in Framingham. If somebody falls off a roof and they have a traumatic injury, you're not going to Newton Wellesley, you're not going to Framingham. Our protocols say that you're gonna go to a trauma center. We transport a lot of people to Leahy, we transport a lot of people to Boston. So do we accommodate special requests? Some people have some unique medical conditions and are followed at certain hospitals. So if you are stable, we try to accommodate that request. But if you have certain conditions and you are unstable, our protocols dictate that we have to go to the closest appropriate facility. So we would like to accommodate your requests all the time. The reality is our directives from the state who license licenses us, all right, says that there's certain protocols we have to follow. All right. Okay, so if we come out to your house and we determine that there's resources that you might need, I just want people to know that we are mandated reporters, and I deal with Bay Path and Springwell all the time. And I've seen some wonderful successes as a result of our interaction with Bay Path and Springwell. So if we go out there and we see someone is struggling, for whatever the reason might be, we can reach out to these folks, share with them what we have found, and in many cases, they will reach back out to you to see if they can provide assistance or what assistance is needed. So I just want you to know, in some cases, we'll come out to your house and you'll hear from Bay Path. I typically will tell people, guess what, as mandated reporters, we're gonna report that it seems like you're unable to, get your loved one up, or you can't afford heating oil for your home, something of that nature. It's important for us, when we're out there and we see this, not to ignore it. So some people get frustrated and say, well, why would you call someone else and tell somebody else? Because we want you to get help. And we've had tremendous successes in working with Bay Path, right, and Springwell as a result of our mandated reporting. So you talked about the MOLST form, and I can't emphasize this enough. As I said earlier, the MOLST form dictates what we do when we get there. It gives us orders relative to what we should and should not do. So if you have a MOLST form, it's great, but it's really important that it has to be valid. So what is valid? Valid means it needs to be signed by the appropriate medical person. It needs to be checked off as to specifically what you want. Let's say you've signed a MOLST form and we show up and you had something that says, I don't want to be resuscitated, but yet you're having a significant cardiac event and you're concerned you're going into cardiac arrest. Can you as an individual go ahead and revoke what you put down on the MOLST form? The answer is, of course you can. You sign the MOLST form. If you get there, absolutely, if you want to change what you want done for your care and what you want us to do, if you're verbally able to communicate that to us, then you can change what you put on your MOLST form. So just because you've written it down in the MOLST form doesn't mean it's absolute. It means that you still have discretion for your care, and we're going to listen to you so you can revoke that. Right, Kathleen?
Absolutely.
Okay, it's very important. Healthcare proxy. The big issue that we see with healthcare proxies is, guess what? Our protocols say if a healthcare proxy is on scene and has a copy or has a copy of their healthcare proxy documentation, that they can also change the directives on the MOLST form. So if they're in another state, all right, they're your healthcare proxy, we technically cannot take instructions from them. So it frustrates people because somebody's in California, we're at your house, and there is a MOLST form, and we're trying to figure out what's going, what type of care, and the person may be unresponsive. That's great that your healthcare proxy is telling us that what they'd like to do. But in many cases, we have to get medical control involved to sort through it. It becomes a little bit more complicated. So if your healthcare proxy is there and has paperwork that says they're the healthcare proxy, they can also make decisions for you when we are at your house. If they are not there, they really can't change the documentation that we have in front of us. They can't do it over the phone. It's very clear in our protocols. So there's a little bit of a wrinkle there that in this day and age where people live all over the country, that'd be very convenient, but our protocols with OEMS clearly state that. So we need to be very mindful. All right, so we talked about accessibility. Again, if we don't have a copy of an active MOLST form, then we can't honor the MOLST form. Just because you say, yeah, well, I think I kind of have a MOLST form, that doesn't cut it for us. It's got to be fully filled out. All right, we talked about revoking. All right. So I want to just cover one other topic. So clearly, as people start to get ill, as we age in life, or we don't have the same capabilities. My father's 91, and I look at all the challenges that he has had over the past years, and clearly he needs more help than he needed before. And the Wayland Fire Department is here to help you as we age in this town. We're very lucky that we have the resources that we have. So I want to talk about a couple of those resources. I promise I'll make it fast. All right. So number one, home safety inspections. If you're ever concerned about your home and the safety of your home or in your home, you can certainly call us. That we're happy to come out and do a free home safety inspection. Right, that's available. A couple of things I would just mention: extension cords, one of the leading causes of fires. Also, recently we've had a number of fires that have been related to people who leave things on their stoves and unintentionally turn on their stoves. So if you want to store combustible materials, may I suggest in your oven or on your cooktop is not the right place to do it. That's my professional opinion. All right, file of life. How many people have seen the file of life? This handy dandy thing here. So what is this? This is something you should keep in your refrigerator.
It's okay.
I'll get back to the podium. This is something to keep in your refrigerator, and it has medical information. Talks about past medical history, which is important. It talks about what medicine you might have. Same thing when you're calling 911. If you have a past medical history, please let us know that you're taking meds, right? But this is called the file life, available for free. Lock boxes. I don't know how many people have lock boxes. Yeah, so this is a lockbox. We will install it for free. What is a lockbox? We put these on the front of your house. There is a cost of $60 because that's the cost for us to buy this, but we install it for free. People don't like to have their front doors broken down. So we have found it's much less expensive for people. If you buy a lockbox and you call us and you are unable to get to the door, we have a special key that opens this lockbox, and there's a key inside of this that we can access so we can open your front door. So if you're interested in these, there's information on our website. All right, or you can call the station, say like a lockbox installed, and you just have to have a second copy or a copy of a key that we can put in this box, and then we note it in our file. So when we get dispatched, we know there's a lockbox and we know approximately where it is, so that we can get into your house more easily without doing damage. All right, and I want to talk about two last things. So as people age, dementia and Alzheimer's, and we have a number of residents who wander, right? And it's very difficult when people wander to do searches. And some people say, yeah, no, we can just use our Apple phones or iWatches to track people. Well, what do we know about the north side of Wayland? How is the cell phone reception in Wayland? So I'm going to suggest my personal opinion is not so great. So we have a different mechanism that we actually have available. And we have some of these units that we can loan to people. In some cases, people choose to buy them themselves. But very simply, this is part of our safety net system. This bracelet can go on someone who has dementia or Alzheimer's, who might be a wanderer. And we can put it on their ankle, or we can put it on their wrist. This doesn't work off cell phone signals. It works off a transmitter that is in here and occasionally puts out little beeps. It's almost like a tracking device, radio tracking device, where we have almost radio antennas and TV antennas like you used to see. And we use that to directionally find people. So we do have this is safety net. And if you have somebody you think is a good candidate or a candidate that needs that, please call us, let us know. If we go out there and we go on a search and somebody had recent Alzheimer's or progressive Alzheimer's or dementia, we may recommend to you for your safety that we have this. We have found a number of cases, and in my experience over 30 years in the fire service, we have found probably 4 people in very short periods of time because we've had devices like this on these individuals. Some searches take days, and unfortunately, when it takes days, the outcomes are not always as good as finding people within an hour. So this is just another alternative as we age in life to help us protect our loved ones. Last one. Everybody knows what this is, right? Smoke detector. I can't emphasize enough, even in today's society, this is worth what, $20? That we go into houses and people don't have battery smoke detectors or CO detectors. Every year in Wayland, we see a number of significant CO exposure situations in houses where heating equipment failed or other equipment failed, generators, and it kicked CO into houses at very high levels. And luckily, people had detectors. CO is colorless, odorless. You will not know if you have CO in your house. The law says you're supposed to have them on every floor with habitable space within 10 feet of every bedroom door. All right, so it's really important. You can buy battery CO detectors. For smoke detectors, we have a program in Wayland. And very simply, if you go through the Council on Aging, they're the gateway for people who qualify. We will go in there and install battery smoke detectors. If you have a hardwired system, we won't touch a hardwired system. We're not electricians, we're not licensed to do so. But we will install for senior citizens free battery smoke detector devices and CO detectors for you, because we're concerned about your safety and your well-being. If you can't do it or if people can't afford it, we're happy to help you, right? So these are some of the services that we offer in Wayland that I think are unique, that are here to support people in the community. I think that's all I have.
Thank you.
Well, thank you both so much, Attorney Summers and Chief McPherson. I think we've all learned so much, and particularly about how fortunate Wayland, the town of Wayland and its residents are to have so many opportunities for help. Now is a time, if you'd like to ask some questions of either of our panelists today, we would be open it up to questions at this time. And if we have any on Zoom, you can let me know, Courtney.
I have a question. Yeah, my question is, we should all have these on file, the modes and everything else. Where do we keep them, except for the file on life that we put in the refrigerator? Where, so that, you know, it's accessible to us, and that's my first question. Where should we keep them? I mean, you dial 911, are they in the safe deposit downstairs, or do you keep a folder handy? Where, how do you have access to this in a medical emergency?
So
Where?
my recommendation is that you would keep it with you, but also in your house. If there's the file of life that's on your refrigerator, one of the first places we look is on the refrigerator. If you're with a loved one, husband and wife, whomever, then very simply, the spouse should go ahead and have one with them as well.
Okay. The other question, going to the most one, is signed by a physician, correct? Now, in this day and age where we're having a shortage of GPs and whatnot, and people are transferring, is any physician good that signature for a certain period? If you had this conversation with your physician now, and then you found out 2 months from now that they're moving to another hospital where they're retiring, who is responsible for implementing your requests?
So.
If you're on a waiting list for a new physician for a year or so, where do you turn to?
So actually, thank you so much, Neil. So it isn't just a physician. It can be a nurse practitioner. It can be a physician's assistant, because if one of you have tried to get a hold of your primary care physician these days, you're going to be waiting a good 6 months. It's unbelievable. Now, if it is signed by a physician and that physician is no longer with that practice or has moved on, certainly the MOLST is still valid, unless you have made a decision to change that MOLST, or as the chief had said, remember, you can change that MOLST in the moment if you chose to. But just because your physician is no longer here or no longer with the practice, it is certainly still a valid document.
One other point just becomes you can put an expiration date on your MOLST as well. So we do look down the bottom, look for the signature, and if there's an expiration date, just be mindful that you'll have to renew that or update that periodically. So a lot of people don't put an expiration date on it.
Thank you.
So NPs and PAs can sign Holtz as well. What's the difference between, I know Massachusetts is MOLST and everybody else.
Right, and I think we're going to be going to more of a standard pulse. They keep talking about it, and from an acronym standpoint, it just says, you know, it stands for physician's orders for life-sustaining treatment as opposed to medical orders. My understanding is that they can be signed by the same groups, so either physician, nurse practitioner, or physician's assistant.
So one of the points just becomes, I think Massachusetts is working on another solution instead of having to have a paper copy. They recently sent out something saying they're looking for fire and other healthcare providers to help them work on a system where most forms could be stored, or we might be able to access instead of carrying a piece of paper. So Massachusetts is looking at this and trying to make this a little easier for everybody.
And I just wanted to add to the question about where to keep documents. When it comes to things like your healthcare proxy, your HIPAA, these are things that you should provide to your provider so that they do have them on file. I often recommend, if there's a hospital that you tend to utilize on a regular basis, get it into your medical record as well. And one other key point about healthcare proxies that I hadn't mentioned. Remember, I find every time we go to a hospital or every time we go to a place to get service, they always say, do you have a healthcare proxy? Oh, you don't? Please sign this one. Every time you sign a new healthcare proxy, you are in effect revoking a past healthcare proxy. Now, sometimes that's not such a big issue if you still have the same people. However, oftentimes I find, particularly if you've done a healthcare proxy document with your attorney, It is a more robust form. It provides a more detailed level of authority that a standard healthcare proxy may not. And so you don't want to revoke an old document unless there's a reason to. So instead, say, no, I have one. And if you can, have a copy of your document to be able to share with your provider.
Following up on that, you said to give copies to your medical provider. Should our healthcare proxy themselves have a copy as well?
So I have some differing experience with that. So most definitely, you want to make sure you've had a conversation with the person you've asked to be your proxy. So you want to ask them, do you mind being my proxy? Because the last thing you want is to name somebody and an emergency happen. And by the way, they're like, no, I'm not going to make those decisions. That's not going to be helpful to you. So by all means, you want to have that conversation. Something like a healthcare proxy, I'm more comfortable with sharing with the individual you've asked. Other documents, like a power of attorney, I know Denise probably spoke about these things. Those are more financial oriented. And oftentimes I say, don't give someone a copy. Make sure they know where they can find the copy. But don't give it to them because you may not want them to have that authority right away. But remember, with the healthcare proxy, it has to be activated anyway before it becomes effective. And so allowing the person you've asked to be your proxy, the chief spoke about, them having that document, if they're there, gives them authority when necessary.
Can you talk a little bit about how to come to the decisions that you put in the MOLST or in your sort of any kind of advanced directive? So I feel like the conversation is different if you get diagnosed with a grave illness versus if you're, healthy right now and you want to have this conversation. Are there tools or people you need to involve?
I don't know if you have any thoughts on, having a healthcare background, and I'm sure the chief can speak more directly to this. Things like resuscitation come with other complications. And and again, you can speak more directly to this. It's not without its issues. Resuscitation can, cause it's a lot. It's pounding on your chest. It can break your sternum. It can cause other issues. And I think you're right. There's different levels of when you make these decisions. An otherwise healthy individual has got a very different set of parameters in terms of your decision making. As you age, as you are dealing with a specific health issue that may be taking a toll on you, frequent rehospitalizations, all of these things come with complications and come with their own consequences. And so I think it's important that you talk with trusted individuals, family members if you have them, certainly your healthcare providers. You want to have these conversations so that you can have some reality about what these different interventions may mean. I don't know if you have.
I would echo those comments. I think as we get older, it's something we need to think about, something we should talk to our doctor and our family about. I'm going to use an example of my father. Unfortunately, he got very ill, and he had not necessarily done this. He was in his 80s, right? And he was perfectly healthy, and then we had a significant event, and then that's when we finally got this done. So it was a little bit late. Everything was fine for many, many years, and we didn't have the conversation. So in hindsight, I wish when he was a little bit younger, we had had that conversation with him to understand that. So my advice is, as we get older, you pick what is appropriate, having the conversation so you don't force people, as I said before, in situations where two siblings are trying to make a decision about one of their loved ones, because I've also seen that go unfortunately horribly wrong and leave long-lasting, shall we say, divisions amongst siblings because of decisions that were made at that point. And both of them had, the individual's best interest in mind, but they had different opinions.
One of the things I want to add too, that I know the chief spoke about with the types of assistance that the town has. One of the key things that I find for all of us as we're aging is that being open to help, being open to what is out there, learning about what is out there while you are still healthy and don't need it. So find out about Bay Path, find out about Springwell, talk to the Council on Aging, find out what's available. Because it is so much better to know what your resources are before you need them and to not be in the middle of a crisis and then trying to figure out which is the best way to go. So get to know what's out there. We are so fortunate in this area to have such supportive services, so many different options for us. Think about that. Really utilize the time while you're healthy, while you're the one who's in control, to really think about what you want, what's important to you, and to be able to put together a little bit of a plan. I often hear we plan more for a vacation than we ever do for our older years. And it's really true, because most times we don't want to be thinking about it. And I know myself, as I'm starting to get into my, 60s into 70s, I'm like, I still feel like I'm 20. So that's part of it too. I need to realize that, climbing the stairs isn't the same as it used to be. Trying to get to the bathroom and the bedroom up in the upstairs level. Think about these different things about your environment. Make sure that you've taken the time to really look and say, is this a place that I can age and be open to the help?
The fire chief used an example of if you show up at someone's house and there's a most. That a healthcare proxy person, if they're not present, can't override the most. But my question is, how would you even know to contact that healthcare proxy that's not there? I mean, I'm confused about.
So in some cases, people are unable to make decisions
Right.
on their own,
Right.
and there may be another family member who says to us, well, I have the healthcare proxy on the phone.
Oh,
And they're trying to give us directives and or change what the MOLS says. And that's where it becomes a little bit complicated. We see that a lot in the assisted living facilities as well, where there's a MOLS form, there's a healthcare proxy, they call the healthcare proxy first, and then we show up. And then we have to have a conversation about how the care is gonna be provided, in some cases get medical direction.
And you just take the person's word for it, that the person they have on the phone is the healthcare proxy?
Well, that's why, according to our protocols, it says we cannot take
Oh, okay.
their instruction unless they are physically present and have the
And-
healthcare documentation in hand. We don't have to validate it. We have to see that there's a healthcare proxy form. We have no means of validating it at the time, so the protocol is very clear in saying that. But we can prove, because they have the form, and typically there's documentation to the extent that this is the person who's there.
But you won't necessarily know if that proxy has been activated, because it's the doctor that has to activate it, right?
We don't always know that. Again, we have to take it at face value at that point.
Okay. Thank you.
Follow-up question for that. For if you do come upon somebody who either well-being check or a 911 call and they are unattended, they're not with another person and they're not able to respond to you, how do you go about finding their next of kin or their next person to help make decisions if they are?
So our immediate goal is to treat them. So we will typically look on a refrigerator, see if there's any type of documentation or MOLS form. If not, then we're gonna do everything we can to resuscitate and or transport them safely and to help them. When they get to the hospital, there's gonna be a process in terms of trying to figure out who these people are. Now, when the police respond, they can also help us while we're taking care of the person and trying to determine who is the individual to kin.
So on like a cell phone, they have an emergency contact.
People who have special medical needs will provide us with information. And we have that in our dispatch software. So if we go to a location, they can look up and it will say 50 Main Street, right? Here's the individual who lives there and here is a contact that they've provided. But otherwise, we don't necessarily have that information. So our goal is get them to the hospital. Let's make sure we treat them every way we can to make sure that they're healthy and safe. And then the hospital has to deal with what is the next step after they've been stabilized.
But also that's why the file of life is so important, because the file of life does have that information on it. It has emergency contact, it has medication information, it has a place where you can say where the healthcare proxy is located. So that's a little plug for the file of life.
Well, it's just funny for younger people too. I think they are not sure when to call 911 and they have the sense that their iPhone has an emergency contact person in there. and that law enforcement will come in and find that and contact, and so I just wondered if that was really something or not.
No, there's a couple of things too that, first of all, you talked about young people, so we're talking a lot about as we age. But the truth is that emergencies can happen to young people as well, and to anyone over the age of 18. Mom and dad can't make decisions anymore legally for them, and so it's really important as our young individuals begin to age and they get into their early 20s, that they think about things like healthcare proxies. Again, we hope it never is necessary to use it, but we have had instances in which a young individual, either some kind of an accident or illness, ends up being in a position in which they can't make decisions for themselves, and their parents don't automatically have the legal right to make decisions. And so it's a conversation we like to start early with people if we can. It's not just as we age, it is for any age.
Just thinking it's interesting that you have to file for civil service, right? When you're 18 as a male, they should have those
They
forms
should
at that
make you
point.
fill out that form.
Are the free resources that you mentioned available to renters as well as homeowners?
So typically they're available to people who own houses, but certainly you can contact the Council of Aging. We review every case that we receive.
Just wanted to mention one thing, the Council on Aging is also having a document day in June. So we do this once a year, where you can make an appointment to have your healthcare proxy and your power of attorney done. We have a lawyer from Metro West Legal Services come. And we do have a few openings left, so if you call the COA, we can set up an appointment for you to have all of those documents done. And that's gonna be on June 25th by appointment.
Any other questions?
Can you talk about the success rate of CPR? Because I've been reading some pretty horrific statistics. And how people don't end up going back to their baseline. TV has created this whole image that, you know, all of a sudden people sit up and they're back at the dining room table, and that's, people don't understand.
So I would suggest to you that it really depends. It depends on what type of heart attack people are having. It depends on their underlying health. It depends on how long it takes the first responders to get there. It depends if bystander CPR has taken place. I would say to you, over the years, unfortunately, I've seen more people die as a result of cardiac arrest than I've seen saved. Having said that, within the past 45 days, we've had 2 saves in Wayland, where 2 people were in cardiac arrest, and we've been able to revive them, and they have been released from the hospital. So it really depends where you're at. And I would say the key becomes, you know, we offer free CPR programs, right, and training at a very basic level. The key, though, is someone has to be willing to start CPR, number one, and also for adults, early defibrillation. Defibrillators are everywhere, in the mall, in the library, in town hall. So the key is to get somebody early defibrillation and know how to use it. The great news is these defibrillators in this day and age, even if you forget everything about CPR, if you open the top of the defibrillator, it will walk you through the process of CPR. It doesn't help you if you're at your house, but if you're at a public place, it is very helpful because it tells you exactly what you are supposed to do. So I think it really depends, and you can see from state to state, there's great variance. And I did go to a program by somebody who was tracking CPR, and bottom line, one of the most important factors is, again, bystander CPR. Did somebody start CPR early? If not, unfortunately, the outcome gets worse for every minute that CPR has not been started.
Thank you all so much for being here today. Oh, we have one more question.
I was just at one point, the fire and carbon monoxide test sensors that you have in the home. Most of them, I think all of them, have a button that you can push to test them. First of all, you know, people don't out of reach or something, but if you just get a stick, you can turn the thing on. The question, or a related question is, if the machine beeps as it should do when you push the thing, is that a sufficiently good test that the device is going to work when it's got smoke? Or is in other words, it's working when I mechanically turn it on, but is the automatic part of it still working? Is that inevitable?
So 3 points. Number one, you should test them every single year,
Yeah.
right? And some of them need batteries replaced every
Yeah,
single year.
could you speak a little aloud?
So number one would be to test them every single year
Hmm,
to make sure you change batteries. Some of the newer devices have 10-year batteries, especially for the smoke detectors. When you push the button, theoretically, it should tell you.
Yeah.
If you hear nothing, then very simply, it's probably not,
oh, then it's definitely.
then it's definitely not,
Yeah.
not working. And as I said before, if you have any question,
Yeah,
they're very inexpensive at this point in time. I recommend that people replace them because they do have a shelf life.
yeah,
So many CO detectors don't last more than 3 to 5 years. And we get false alarms because they're going off, and typically because the detector and the sensors have failed at that point in time, and they'll let you know, and they'll chirp intermittently.
Hmm,
So don't be afraid to replace them. If there's any questions, just replace them.
yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much. Thank you to the Wayland Free Public Library and to the Council on Aging for your joint partnership in bringing these panels. Again, June 5th, we'll have the Demystifying Hospice panel. We'll be having lots of information about palliative and hospice care. And thank you all so much for coming, and thank you both so much for sharing your experience and wisdom with us.